And welcome into another post-game edition of Spits and Suds on 105.3 The Fan. I'm Gavin Spittle. Thank you so much for supporting and listening to this small little podcast, which just continues to grow, and that's because of you. Tough times in Finland, but as we talked about in our preview of this two-game set between the clubs, they were very evenly matched going in. You could easily see the Stars pulling out both games. You could see the Panthers pulling out both games. You could see a split. Especially today, you saw how evenly matched these teams are, but it's the Florida Panthers with AJ Greer and the go-ahead goal in the third period. That's the fifth straight win for Florida, as they have not missed a beat since raising the cup, and an empty net goal late, and they beat the Stars by the score of 4-2, sweeping the series in Finland. A couple things. One, awesome that the Stars are on this global stage. So I wanted to start with that because a few years back, Twitter was kind of a buzz as far as the Stars' lack of national games. And this was before the conference finals run. And now, since then, you have seen a Winter Classic in your hometown. We have seen two conference finals, and now we are featured on the global stage. We do have a lot of Finns. They have a lot of Finns as well. But as Brad Alberts has pointed out, there was an offer to go to China. Mexico City might be in play for the future. So I just wanted to take a step back, and yeah, it's tough losing two games, and it's tough that we can't pop an afternoon frosty. But I did want to say, how great is it that your team is now featured in more than national games than they have been in a long time? They're featured in a global series against the defending Stanley Cup champions and a team that has gone to the Stanley Cup for 2 straight years. So your team has arrived in several circles. Now, on ice, personally, I can see a difference between this Florida team and the Dallas team. Are they semi-evenly matched? Yes. At the same time, I think the simplest way to describe this, and I'm not trying to be anti-Stars in any way, I just feel as though when I watch the Florida Panthers, and I'm one of those guys that enjoys watching the Florida Panthers even on off nights. You know, if I can catch a game that they're playing, they're just so disciplined and they play a great two-way game. And I just felt as though it was a business trip for the Florida Panthers. And when you play in two straight Stanley Cups, and when you've gone through the gauntlet of the Eastern Conference, and let's even talk about the Atlantic Division, when you have to go through Tampa and then beat Boston, and then you have to go to the New York Rangers and you take down the team that won the President's Trophy, going to Finland is a business trip. Sure, it's really, really cool and it's a bonding experience. I think the other advantage that Florida had in this, and I'm not trying to make excuses for the Stars, is Florida played earlier this week on the road against Buffalo. And they've been on the road for a while now. So once again, this team is hardened. And I think they were all business over here. They knew that they were playing the Stars. And when you're playing a back-to-back, you know, you don't have necessarily the time to adapt. If these teams had played maybe a month or two apart in their two-game series, we might have seen something different. I thought the Stars adjusted well today. I thought they limited the turnovers, which were a massive story in game one. I thought the passing was more crisp. I love the way they came out with the physicality. And physicality, good or bad, sparks energy. And the Stars certainly had better legs at times. But what Florida does so good is limit the opportunities, especially the high quality scoring chances. And I'm going to jump ahead for a second to the third period. After the Panthers went up by the score of 3-2, I was saying to myself, wow, this is going to be tough. And there was a lot of time left in this game. It's going to be tough after that A.J. Greer goal off the faceoff for the Stars to tie this up, because in the offensive zone, they really didn't have any sustainability throughout the game. There was that one streak where you had the goals of Dodonov and Duchesne right back to back. And the best way to remember it is that's kind of when Victory had the technical difficulties. And stick tap to Brian Ray and Brent Severin. Heck of a job calling those goals. And I was going to pull back the curtain, and I guess I'll do it right now, is that, for a living, myself and my assistant program director, Tim Collins, 105.3 The Fan is the home of the Dallas Cowboys and the Texas Rangers. So there are layers in place when things go wrong, and you hope that those layers can come through. And Brian Ray is just not a studio host. Brian Ray is a really good play-by-play announcer. And he couldn't go in depth because he was basically calling it with no notice off a smaller monitor. But I thought him and Sevy did a really, really nice job as far as just explaining the flow and laying back when they needed to so that you could get the feel of the game still. And so, not going to be talked about a lot, but I definitely wanted to give them a stick tap, because we can say, oh, great job, but stick tap to Victory Plus as well. Yeah. Technical difficulties, but you know what? Technical difficulties during broadcasts happen, especially when you're across the pond. So kudos to those guys for stepping in. I thought they did a really, really nice job. And kudos for Victory Plus having those two guys in place just in case so that they could call it properly. They jumped in when needed to. But that third period, I just felt as though Florida clogged things up and you just couldn't get anything going. In fact, when there were a couple minutes left in the game, I actually tweeted out, I said, do not pull Casey DeSmith. Pull him with a minute or less to go, because I don't think the Stars, even with 6 players on the ice, can get kind of any kind of offensive cycle going. It just seemed as though Florida did a really good job. Not only did they stop you from high scoring chances, and yes, the Stars did hit some posts, but one thing Florida does so well, and you saw it a couple times during the third period specifically, Matt Duchesne and Jamie Benn had breakout opportunities, but they had to clear the puck down because a change was necessary. And that goes back to Florida working so hard in the defensive end, cycling and tiring the Stars forwards out. And it's a strategy. It's not by any kind of accident or coincidence. That is a strategy by Paul Maurice. Tire the other team out, because what do you do when you tire that team out? And what do the Stars feast on? Speed. Well, you can't have speed if you're trying to fight the puck in your own end. And like I said, it just felt like Florida has been there, done that in these 2 games. But I thought the Stars played really well today. Do I think they deserve a point? Sure. I thought the Stars easily could have had a point today. But at the same time, it does kind of crack the window open, and we aren't far enough into the season. I like at the quarter mark to start evaluating needs. So it's tough when you go up against the Stanley Cup champion to all of a sudden throw out deficiencies in what you need. But I will point out that with the Sagan kind of banged up and the injury off and on, you'd love to see him play in multiple games in a row. and the Stars kind of have a every other night schedule when they get back at it on Thursday, and they have a tough game a week from today in Winnipeg. You kind of want to see a breakout, and they're not around, so you would have to give up something big. But I just need a takeover offensive player that has to be neutralized, that one player which will open up space for a couple other players. Let's talk about in tight matchups, because I think that was really big in these two games. All 5 goals scored tonight, minus the empty netter, were scored in tight. 2 of the Florida goals off beautiful tips by Rodriguez and Dadonov and Tkachuk and Duchesne. All were in tight. Matt Duchesne, wow, what a season. 4 points in this series. Now 15 points in 11 games. Clearly the best Stars forward right now. Amazing signing by Jim Nill prior to this year. Great re-signing him. And when you look at the value of that contract, whew, that's why he's been GM of the year. As I mentioned, Tyler Seguin, I feel as though his absence hurt tonight. Would have been great to have a scoring forward, and Tyler Seguin has been extremely active this year, having a good year, just tough to stay on the ice. So hopefully next Thursday he can come back. I think he'd provide some punch in that lineup. The captain, Jamie Benn, I thought he was throwing his weight around well. I thought he was playing well. And like I said, 2 bad post shots. Would have loved to seen Stankoven bury that in the first, but it was off a one-timer. And when you're playing a backup goalie, I mean, you can't really think about it, but post hit. And then Wyatt Johnson, you saw his head go up. He's frustrated right now. Just a beautiful tip off of Jason Robertson shot in the third period that goes off the post as well. But they just weren't able to get any kind of sustained pressure on Florida in tight, specifically causing a habit. And they tried to be physical, and I give them credit for being physical. I thought Brendan Smith was very physical tonight. Do I like the move? If Pete DeBoer comes out and says physicality was a key to this game, I felt after Friday that these guys kind of needed a kickstart, then yes, Brendan Smith's the right move. But I just don't want to see Nils Lundkvist lose confidence, because I think he's been one of the Stars' better defensemen. That's right, I said it, better defensemen on the ice this year. So hopefully we see Nils Lundkvist back in the lineup soon. I also wanted to point out, and this is a Dallas Stars podcast, but, we talk a lot about Jim Nill, 2-time GM of the year. And what we don't really talk about a lot of times is the other side. So when I say go get a scorer, sometimes those scorers, you can get if you're creative. And here's a perfect example. And this is why I want to stick tap Bill Zito for the Florida Panthers. He's their general manager. So a couple of years ago, Sam Reinhart was traded to the Panthers from Buffalo, for Devin Levy, the backup goaltender for Young, but a backup goaltender right now, to the Sabres. And the Sabres also received a 2022 first-round pick. That first-round pick is 20-year-old center Yuri Kulik, who just started for Buffalo this season. Young, could see something, but after 7 games, really haven't seen much yet, but could have a bright career with the Sabres. So they do get 2 young players, but not making the impact of Sam Reinhart now in his 4th season. He has already lifted a Stanley Cup, 253 points and 133 goals. What a trade by Bill Zito. Evan Rodriguez, who you saw in these 2 games, how effective he was. Free agent signing last year, big piece of their cup-winning team. We saw the Matthew Tkachuk trade from Calgary and how that's paid off. And today's top star of the game, AJ Greer, very under-the-radar signing. 4 teams said no, but Florida said yes, and he fits real nice into that Florida Palmery style. So stick tap on some of those moves by the Florida Panther organization. And when we talk about moves to win a Stanley Cup, those are some of the moves that you need to make. So sometimes you need to get creative, and maybe like defensively, you don't necessarily need to go out and make a trade. You bring up Bischel from Texas, and maybe he's your guy. And maybe that's the impact player. Maybe that's the guy that provides physicality on your blue line. So let's go to your tweets, a lot of them, and thank you so much for your support. I love answering and chatting with you during these post shows. Cody Markham, stick tap to you, Cody. These games had hints written all over him. He continues to struggle to take over games. Are we overrating him? Well, let's just first say, it's tough enough going back to your home country, but when you're basically playing in your hometown, that is a lot of pressure. At the same time, yeah, I think there are times that he can take over the game, but is he dominant? No, I personally don't feel as though. Overrated? I wouldn't say necessarily he's overrated, Cody. Um, let's see how that contract pans out. But at the same time, he is putting up points. But you're right, he isn't taking over games, and that's what you want to see. When you drop those contracts, and that's one of the issues with this Stars team. We saw it on Friday where Barkov took over the game. Just amazing passing ability. Clearly the number one star of the game. And then you look at the Stars over these two games, and you could make a case for Matt Duchene. But at the same time, when you watch the entirety of the game, is Matt Duchene taking over the game? I'd say he's a factor, but who's that breakout star that you have to see? And I think that's why, it'll be interesting to see Wyatt Johnston's development this year, because he's that guy. He was certainly that guy after January 1st last season. Wyatt Johnson, number 53, is elite. At Craig TX80 says, big trap game coming home against the Blackhawks on Thursday, and then Boston. Stars fans will need to be ready if they want to avoid an early season skid. Well, I would say trap game in that Winnipeg is Saturday, and that is going to be really, really tough in Winnipeg. So these games are interesting because it has been a long layoff to these two games, and then you have another long layoff. And the reason they have to do that is the time adjustment, proper rest. The Stars are staying in Finland overnight and then flying back tomorrow. Could it be a trap game? Well, I will say this. Chicago kind of gave them all that they could handle in the last game. So I would hope that Pete DeBoer has his troops ready and they come out firing. The Harry Wagstaff, let's go to David Castillo, who's one of our co-hosts on Spits and Suds. He says, did you buy the Gladiator 2 tickets yet? No. Well, no, man. We're going to go together, right? My serious question is this. Is it too early to identify exactly what Dallas needs ahead of the trade deadline? Like I said, I like to go the quarter season and then evaluate. But my man, I want to see a number one scorer on this team, because I don't really see it from Hintz. I don't really see it from Robertson. Stankoven, really, really good. But is he your top scorer? Is he an elite scorer in this league? Johnston, is he an elite scorer in this league? Is Matt Duchene an elite scorer? That might be your best bet. But I mean, when you look at these teams and you look at the cup teams over the last couple of years, so look at Florida with Barkov and Kachuk. Those are players that take over the game. Colorado, McCarr, McKinnon. Those are players that take over the game. Vegas, Eichel. Those are players that take over games, that come up in big moments. And when they won the cup, Marcia Show would certainly be in that category as well. So the Harry Wagstaff replied to David and said, same thing we needed last year. And I'm guessing he means a top tier defenseman in Chris Tanev. And I would say that I don't know defensively if you're getting hurt that bad. I would certainly say that if I were to go out and I think you need scoring punch. Look at the power play. So you're going to get more goals and you're also going to help your power play. That's why I want to see a scoring forward. So it's early, but those are just some thoughts as far as what maybe the Stars need to do. All right, let's go to more of your tweets. Dart2284. This is way too early, but if the Stars don't make it to the final this year, is it time for a coaching change? Let's see how far they go. I think Pete DeBoer has been a nice fit in this organization. I think the players like him. 2 Western Conference finals in a row. And if you get knocked out of the playoffs, I don't think that's necessarily the time to let your coach go. I will say this, and this will be an unpopular opinion. I think a major trade might shake things up. And you hate to lose players, but at the same time, if you can't get over the hump, maybe you need to change the culture. That's what Florida did, getting Kachuk, and then they built pieces around him. And I know Jim Nils said that as long as I'm here, Jamie Benn will be here. And I can appreciate that. And I love everything the captain has given us. But at the same time, how much longer do you go with the captain? Or do you say, Jamie, we love you, but we're going to move in a different direction? It's not a knock on Jamie Benn. He has been an absolute franchise-defining player. But at the same time, sometimes you have to make tough moves, and maybe that's saying goodbye to Jamie Benn. If it's not saying goodbye, maybe you put players around and open up salary cap with another trade that Jamie Benn moves down even more in the lineup. I think Jamie can be effective at times, but I need game changers. Let's go back to when the Stars won the Stanley Cup. And times were different back then. But they went and got Brett Hull. And they had Mike Modano. And they had Yuri Lettinen. They went and got Ed Belfour. So, they added pieces that were cup-winning pieces. Not to mention, they went and got Joe Nieuwendyk. And that was a massive, massive ad for the Dallas Stars in the playoff run. UK Dallas Stars fanatics agree with this. 9 penalty minutes in today's game alone. Because Adam Deacon asks, hey, Gavin, what are your thoughts on Marchment? His discipline is poor and sits in the box far too often. So Mason Marchment is a roller coaster. And I love the energy he brings. I love the physicality he brings. But today was not the Mason Marchment that I enjoy watching. I thought it was a very dangerous hit. I don't blame Florida for going after him. Clearly, he went in for that check, and Florida's player was clearly with his back to Marchment. You just can't do that. That's needless. The hook early on is needless. And you could say, well, that was just Mason Marchment has to understand that referees are looking at him. Now, Mason Marchment does draw a lot of penalties, but today I felt as though Mason Marchment hurt his team more than helped his team. So I think it's a really good point. I think he needs to stay out of the box. And the thing about it is, Mason Marchment is really effective when he's on the ice. So losing Mason Marchment in the penalty box hurts you also offensively. All right, DFW plane spotters. Okay, question one. How TF are we beating Winnipeg? I mean, it's a good question. Any NHL team can beat any NHL team at a time. I'm excited to see Ottinger versus Hellebuck. I hope I see that happen. That's a real fun American goaltending matchup. But you know what? Let's see what happens, because the Stars have had some really good success and they match up well in the past against Winnipeg. Let's see how they match up with this current Stars team against the current different coached Winnipeg Jets team. Adam Deacon, Wyatt is seriously missing Joe Pavelski too. Looks very out of sorts. You know what? I think Wyatt Johnston's quietly putting up points. I think it just goes back to, is Wyatt Johnston that impact player as far as needs to be accounted for, is dominant in games? I think they have a lot of good players, but who's that breakout star that every game is going to bring it? And you're like, wow, we're playing the Dallas Stars tonight. Look out. Let's see. At Texas Hockey Ref. Thanks for reffing, my man. Chuck L. He says the Panthers are better than the Stars. We have some work to do defensively to get to their level. Yeah, let's give credit to not just the blue liners of the Panthers. There were several times in this game where back checks by the Panthers stopped high-scoring Stars chances. So let's give stick tap also to the Florida Panthers forwards, even some of their higher paid forwards who were really playing good quality two-way hockey. All right, Martin Kroom says, all the way from across the pond in England, what's the Finnish number for 911? Someone seems to have kidnapped Hintz's talent. We have to work to do if we have to play the Panthers again this season. The silly part is the roller coaster that is Stars hockey. Need to turn to form after their vacation versus Chicago. Yeah, I mean, you know, they do have the opportunity against Chicago. I think they're better than the Blackhawks. The Wild are tougher this year, but I think they're better than the Wild. So some opportunities to put some points up. So you can't look at this and say, what's wrong with the Stars? You have to chalk it up to, you played the defending Stanley Cup champions. Like, if this game was 2 months apart and you were swept in the season series, I don't think we'd be talking about what's wrong with the Stars if they ran off wins. It's just like, well, they're not at Florida's level, but they're beating every other team. I think Florida is at a different level right now. They are very tough when you look at what are Florida weaknesses. Maybe goaltending, maybe, but your goaltender was outstanding last year. So that probably is your weakest link. But other than that, give me some Florida weaknesses, because they're running through the NHL right now. There is no slump from the partying, from the Stanley Cup. They want another cup. And remember what Matthew Tkachuk said when he was in the handshake line, when they lost in the Stanley Cup Finals. He said, see you next year. They had a plan, and they have executed it to a T. Preston, at Chief Wanabanga. Oh, wow, that's an interesting name. I should have just stuck with Preston. Gavin, love the podcast. Thank you, man. Really appreciate it. First-time poster. Feel like the boys are teetering on a huge breakthrough and really getting things going, but still just aren't quite there yet. Could we also see some youngsters from Cedar Park thrown into the lineup soon? Also, Florida still looks phenomenal. Thank you once again, Preston. That is super cool that you're activating and you're contacting us on Spits and Suds. Really appreciate you listening to the podcast. Yeah, I think we're very close as far as this Dallas Stars franchise. So would it surprise me if they made it to the Western Conference Finals this year? No, it wouldn't surprise me at all. In fact, you know, we're at the point after 2 conference finals that we're feeling a letdown if we don't get there. In fact, if we don't get to the Stanley Cup, there are going to be Stars fans that want Pete DeBoer to leave and that want to make wholesale changes. And you do at some point have to figure out, how do I take this team to the next level? And for Jim Nill, I think it was a depth piece this year. I think it was a change defensive philosophy as far as getting more players that are physical on the blue line. Tanev was going to be a really, really tough contract to match. I don't blame them for not doing it. A 5-year deal for a guy of his age is very difficult. Plus, the tax implications that Tanev would have had to face would have been more money out of his pocket than savings from state tax. Sean Shapiro on this podcast pointed out that very eloquently. And the other thing, he's from the Ontario area, wearing a Leaf sweater for, as a kid. So how can you blame him? But can they beat Florida? Ooh, that would be tough. Any team can beat any team, but you're right, Preston. Just not on that same level. As for Cedar Park, I think the team is where they are right now. I think that they will look at Bischel's development. That's the player you need to look at. That's the player. If there's a call up that's going to happen, it's going to be him. But I will point out, Preston, that you have 7 defensemen on this roster, including Brendan Smith, that are on one-way contracts. Nils Lundqvist, one-way contract. So therefore, you could, in essence, drop down Beck and call up Bischel, but then where's your forward backing up? You could play that game of back and forth to an extent, but you're really limited on your blue line. You would essentially, if you wanted to, have one on waivers, see if anyone claims him. But you're still responsible for that contract, even if no one claims him. Tanner Wilson. I was joking after, and I've never seen this, and I got to give a lot of credit to Finland, because when AJ Greer won the #1 star of the game, he was presented a bag, and I had tweeted out, AJ Greer, the Panthers, with the #1 star, and receives the CVS gift bag. That looked exactly like a bag I would buy if I'm going over someone's house from CVS, and put a little tissue paper in there and maybe a bottle of wine. So I don't, the players didn't even know what was in there, because they were looking, and when you saw him go back to his teammates, they were seeing what was in there as well. So kind of a funny moment there. Let's see. Who else do we have that chimed in tonight? Ben Phillips says Florida is good and should probably repeat this year. Stars need to get deeper. I think the Rangers are going to be really tough again. So I think Florida, that's going to be a tough series for them. Let's see what happens. You never know. Sometimes these teams that start off early, look at Edmonton last year, off to a horrible start to start the season. Get the new coach, all of a sudden life back in Edmonton, and they go to the Stanley Cup. Look at St. Louis a few years back. They were the worst team in the league, and there was a fight between teammates in a practice, and they went on to win the Stanley Cup. So it's too real early to point these things out, but at the same time, it's pretty amazing that Florida continues to roll. You're right, Ben. Chris Stabkoven, what do the Stars have to do to get guys like Hintz, Johnston, Bork, Harley, Miro all playing together? Our top guys have been no-shows so far this year. No shows in both these Finland games. Yeah, interesting move by DeBoer. Not only does he take Nils Lundqvist out of the lineup, he repairs Harley and Heiskanen, because I think he wants to see more offense out of that top defensive pair. Didn't really see that again tonight. They did have some shots on net. But yeah, Hintz, Johnston, Bork. I think the Stars have to go into the dirty area, have to get nasty around that blue crease, has to cause a lot of havoc in front of the net, be physical. I just don't think it will happen on talent alone. I think, honestly, Chris, I think that the Stars need to go back to basics of hockey. And that's straight line, stop with the cute passing, lots of shots on net, and please, please screen the goaltender. I mean, let's look. Sometimes the screens on the goaltenders are your own players, and that's why you shoot the puck. AJ Greer with the game-winning goal off a clean face-off win from Florida. Look how quick he shot it. He was not looking past. That is a designed play by Paul Maurice and his staff. AJ Greer was not in the right place at the right time. He was meant to be right in that place. These guys are good enough to take the back draws like that. And he immediately shot it. And I think Labushkin was in front of DeSmith, and that's what caused the screen. It was a great shot by Greer, but nonetheless, you could tell that DeSmith, who played really well, I thought, tonight, he's been good all season. He couldn't see the puck. All right. Michael Joseph. Pete DeBoer completely outcoached. How Robertson has significantly regressed. The roster needs major upgrades. Well, I would say this. I think Paul Maurice is, if not the best coach in hockey, maybe Bruce Cassidy as well. I would say he's top 3. Even when he was Winnipeg, he was known as one of the top coaches in the league. So being outcoached by Paul Maurice is not a bad thing. I don't think DeBoer was outcoached in game 1. I think you just lost the game in the first period. I mean, you had no legs coming out. And DeBoer realized that and made some changes today. So you have to give credit to DeBoer for the changes he made today, because it seemed like they worked. And you could see there was clearly a message sent by the coach to the players. Hey, more legs, better energy. Let's get physical. So I don't think personally, Michael, I don't think DeBoer was out coached. I think you just played a better team. Belfour's Billions. We made it to Finland, and while the Stars disappointed, the country and the atmosphere did not. Oh, that's awesome, man. Congratulations. Massive stick tap for you and all the Stars fans that made it across the pond to a beautiful country, which I found out this week, courtesy of Mike Bassick of 105.3 The Fan, is the friendliest, one of the friendliest countries in the world. Other than Stars hockey, it's been a great experience. When does Dallas take a serious look at the blue line? I know it's early, but not a cup caliber squad. I think, like I said, you start searching at the quarter point and seeing your weaknesses, and probably at the All-Star game, and then you make the trades closer to the trade deadline. So I think that's when you do it, and don't be surprised if Bischel gets the call up, similar to Harley a couple of years ago. Safe travels back, my man, and thank you so much for supporting Spits and Suds. JT Manazzi at JT Manazzi, 2 Z's on that one. Need Hinson Johnston to start producing. Seems like the Duchesne line is the only line maintaining our offensive pressure and points right now. Well, it's a good point about the Duchesne line, but let's look at that Duchesne line for a second in today's game. How much more effective would they have been? And Matt Duchesne scored, but you lost Mason Marchment with 9 penalty minutes and Tyler Sagan's out. That's a difference. And that's why Mason Marchment needs to stay out of the box. So, yeah, I mean, Rope Hintz and Johnston, they do need to produce more in the goal category. They're putting up points. All right. Nick Sellers says, what is the Stars' offensive identity? The long stretch passes don't seem to be as effective anymore, and they just generally don't look in sync for sustained zone time and high danger chances. So talk to Sean on this about the podcast. The Stars traditionally, under this Pete DeBoer system, have not been a quality zone time team. They're in, take your shots, and get out. And they're quick line changes because they want to stay fresh. Offensive identity, if I were to pick one, it would be their speed and their skill, but at times both have been neutralized by the opposition, and that's a problem. That's why when you look at these cup winners, Vegas, look at, let's take Vegas, for example. Can Vegas beat you physically? Yes, they can. Can Vegas beat you by scoring more goals? Yes, they can. Can Vegas shut things down defensively? Yes, they can. Can they muck it up? Yes, they can. So when you look at Florida, all those things I just mentioned, Florida has in their game. So if Mason Marchment's going to make a check like that, yeah, they're going to come in and they're going to come in hard. And Paul Maurice doesn't mind that physicality. And he'll take that penalty because he gets Mason Marchment out of there, who would have been out of there. But, he's out there for fighting as well. So it was actually plus Florida on that. So I would say if there is an offensive identity when it's clicking, I would say speed and skill set. Husky says, thoughts on the lack of goal production from Wyatt, Robo, and Rope. I think we have a theme here. All three have to be better. They're putting up points, but they're just not dominant. And that's what we need from this Dallas Stars team. We need a dominant player. Stars still miles off of Florida, says Brandon F. Dub. I would say, yeah, certainly Florida's better. I wouldn't say miles, maybe yards, but I would say this to counter who's with Florida. We just have to keep reminding ourselves of this. Yes, the Stars have lost 2 in a row, but they've lost 2 in a row to the Stanley Cup champions. Supernova Overs says, whatever Duchesne is eating, can he feed the rest of the team? Yes. What a signing by Jim Nill. And that second signing and Matt Duchesne wanting to play here. That's why we need to cheer on Matt Duchesne. He had choices in the offseason. I don't think he gave it a second thought. I think Matt Duchesne loves it in Dallas, wants to play here, loves his teammates. Matt Duchesne has been a staple of this team for the last 2 years. So kudos to Jim Nill and the organization for recognizing Matt Duchesne as a player when he was released by Nashville. At the same time, using that Nashville contract to their advantage with limited salary cap and signing him now for the second straight year. Chris Barnard says, I'm not trying to jump the gun here, but should we be excited about the emergence of Strangis and Wheatcroft this season in the AHL, just when you thought the pipeline was thinning out? Yeah, I'm interested. Need to see more. Need to, we talk about this a lot on Spits and Suds. It's not necessarily the players and the skill set. The difference between the AHL and the NHL is consistency. That's what gets you in the NHL, and that's what keeps you in the NHL. Let's use Denis Gurianov, our old friend, as an example. Skill set, yes. Remember, he scored that massive one-timer against Vegas during the pandemic that lifted us into the Stanley Cup Finals. Just a massive shot. That one-timer was amazing. There were games where Denis Gurianov, you're like, finally, he found it. And he just was too inconsistent. And I hated it because I loved him as a player. I loved everything about him. And Denis Gurianov right now is between the Milwaukee Admirals and sometimes occasionally getting called up for the Nashville Predators. Actually, he's in Russia this year. So it's just consistency at the AHL level and continuing that to the NHL level. That's what Robertson was able to do. That's what Maverick Bourque was able to do. And Maverick Bourque hasn't shown that consistency yet in the NHL. Am I worried? No, not yet. But there's a reason he was scratched a couple of games ago. Let's talk about Evgeny Dadonov and what a great season he's having. Another great signing. The guy's a Swiss Army knife. And actually, when Sagan comes back, I want to see Dadonov drop to that fourth line. I like what Oscar Beck has done, but I think Dadonov gives that creativity that can get you some points on that fourth line. Remember, traditional fourth lines in the past were the heavy hitting, go in, muck it up kind of. And there are some NHL teams that still have that philosophy. But this Stars team, imagine Evgeny Dadonov on a fourth line with Blackwell and Sam Steele. I think that would open up things. At Mr. Baseball 75, it's going to be a long flight home and a long 5-day layoff if the Stars can't come away from Finland with some points. I think they're disappointed, but I think it's a good experience for the playoffs. Matt Day, stick tap to you. Matt, you were an awesome follow in Finland. Love the outfits, bringing them overseas. He says, my observations from Finland, game 1, Stars got off to a bad start, end up chasing the whole game. Yeah, nailed it. Game 2 was much better, but once they gave up that third goal, the Panthers got to dictate pace. For now, the defending cup champions are the better team, but not by much. I mean, I think that's a fair assessment. And stick tap, Matt. So awesome that you got to go over in Finland. Me included, so many of us are jealous. All right, want to give some shout outs, okay? Taylor Baird did a great job covering this team in Finland. Our man, Robert Tiffin, if you are not reading Stars Thoughts or going there, starsthoughts.com on a daily basis, seeing what he has to bring to the table, he is a terrific writer. And I'm so glad Robert Tiffin is getting now the credit he deserves. So at Robert Tiffin, he's a regular contributor here on Spits and Suds. So starsthoughts.com. He's a great follow, has a lot of tidbits about the Dallas Stars. So he's a great daily follow at Robert Tiffin. We'll have him on the podcast soon. Leah Simakopoulos from the Dallas Morning News. Kudos to the Dallas Morning News for sending Leah. That is awesome, especially since Leah helps cover SMU football. SMU with a massive game against Pittsburgh. So the fact that they sent someone to Finland, that's amazing. And once again, the reason that we created Spits and Suds was to help grow this great game in DFW. So when I see all these reporters heading over to Finland, I think it's awesome. I think the coverage is awesome. And a massive stick tap, as always, to the senior DallasStars.com writer. Great follow, Mike Heika. So make sure you follow Mike. And thank you to all the reporters that covered the Stars this week in Finland. It was a terrific week for multiple reasons. Yeah, not good on the ice, but what a treat for the Finnish players. What a treat to grow this great game even more globally. What a treat for all the Panthers and Stars fans that got to go over to an amazing country and see the culture and take it in. So overall, everything went smooth. It was a great week. I do want to stick tap Victory Plus. Not easy when you're a new network and you're going over to a foreign country and covering it overall. Sure, technical difficulties today, but like I said, the parts were in place to overcome that. So stick tap to Victory Plus as well. And a stick tap to you for supporting Spits and Suds as we now roll along in November. We have a couple of real cool programs next week, even prior to the Stars and Chicago, which happens on Thursday. Also want to dedicate this program to our producer, Gregory Finley. His grandmother, Dorothy, passed away. Greg is a major part of this program. I need to mention him more, but without Greg, Spits and Suds doesn't happen. So if you get a chance, please say a prayer for our producer, Gregory Finley, who does such an amazing job on this podcast, putting it together, and our best wishes to his family on the loss of his grandmother. I'm Gavin Spittle. We'll be back with another episode soon, right here on 105.3 The Fan. Have a great rest of the weekend, everyone.